Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's EHS Daily Advisor webcast. Today we are presenting Bring Your Hearing Program into the 21st Century, sponsored by Shoebox Audiometric. My name is Sarah from the EHS Daily Advisor, and before we start today's presentation, there are just a few housekeeping items to go over. The On24 Webinar Council offers multiple application widgets that you can use throughout today's presentation. You can resize, move, or minimize them as you wish. Please note that there is no dial-in for today's event. The audio will be streaming directly through your computer speakers. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, please click on the Help widget. It has a question mark icon and covers common technical errors. If your technical issue persists, please enter a question into the Q&A widget and our team will gladly assist you. Now on to today's exciting presentation. I'm pleased to introduce Alexa Goff. Alexa is an occupational hearing conservation business unit manager at Shoebox Audiometric. In this role, she works with some of the most forward-thinking manufacturers and on-site, near-site occupational healthcare providers in North America. She has a passion for partnering with them to find innovative ways of improving the way they deliver audiometric testing, as well as part of a hearing conservation program, all while helping them achieve their overall business objectives. Now, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Alexa today to the floor. Alexa, I'll pass over the mic to you.
Wonderful, thank you, and thanks for that introduction. I'm going to jump right into it. So on today's presentation, what we're going to be covering primarily is how to eliminate the need for mobile clinics within hearing conservation. So we'll look at the benefits to both in-house programs, but also service providers as well, and how doing so how eliminating trucks can help you reduce the costs associated with hearing conservation programs. In addition to that, we'll also explore why, whether you're a service provider or in-house team, why you might want to consider moving away from a once-per-year testing model towards what we like to say is a rolling schedule or flexible schedule based on other milestones like hire dates or birth dates. And then lastly, what we're going to look at is how to improve the employee experience. So this is something that doesn't often get talked about when we're looking at hearing conservation, but we really believe that improving the employee or the testee experience is important. So we'll do a bit of an exploration of that as well. Before I jump into those topics, I thought it would make sense to just do a quick level set here. So when we say audiometric testing, what are we actually talking about? So let's just do that now before we go any further. So the first thing, when we talk about audiometric testing, what we're talking about really is hearing tests. But they're very, a specific type of hearing test. So audiometric testing as part of a hearing conservation program, what we're looking at is really a 7-frequency test when we're talking about OSHA-style tests. And they're a test performed using an audiometer. An audiometer is a precise piece of equipment, a medical device, and it's used to evaluate your ability to hear sounds. Those sounds will vary based on two things, intensity and tone. And again, if we're looking at OSHA-mandated tests, it's typically going to be a 7-frequency test that ends in a clinically valid audiogram that you're going to keep on file for further reference in the future. In general, these tests, if we're testing 7 frequencies, they should take, less than 10 minutes per test. Obviously, they'll include a bit more time for instruction, maybe coaching or training afterwards with the employee, but the test itself should take about 10 minutes. And it is typically, well, at least today what we're going to be talking about is how to conduct those tests outside of a sound booth. What should the testing environment look like? What kind of rules are in place to ensure that you're testing in a compliant fashion and in an environment that makes sense. So that's hearing tests. What do we mean when we say baseline? So all hearing conservation programs or hearing testing programs within hearing conservation begin with a baseline test. When we say baseline, a baseline audiogram is really not designed to identify whether or not an employee has any hearing loss, but really to establish a baseline hearing level for that employee and it will be conducted as soon as possible after they're hired by an employer. And so we're trying to figure out what their level of hearing is at the start of their employment, okay, with a specific employer. Having that baseline for each employee within the hearing conservation program then allows us to measure whether there have been any shifts in their level of hearing since time of hire. So we want to know if, their hearing is changing significantly over time, because obviously we want to know if that shift or that change is being caused by work-related environment or environmental factors. So once you have that baseline in place, from that day forward, we will then conduct annual tests. So we'll take that baseline, and then once we've conducted that annual test, we'll compare the annual test results to that baseline test, and from there determine if there have been any shifts in the employee's level of hearing. If there has been a shift, and there's different types of shifts that we'll discuss today, but if there has been a shift, there's a whole series of prescribed next steps that are outlined very clearly by OSHA in terms of what needs to be done depending on the severity of the hearing loss. Some of the examples of those next steps will be referral to an audiologist or ENT for further analysis. Again, the audiologist is going to be looking for what types of factors may be causing that hearing loss, whether they're physical or environmental. Certainly they'll be trying to uncover whether the hearing loss is due to work-related events or environmental factors, or if it's caused by extracurricular activities. Do they ride a motorcycle? Do they go to a lot of rock concerts on the weekends? Those kinds of things will be analyzed by the audiologist. If the shift is determined or is confirmed by an audiologist during that review period, then again there's prescribed next steps that must take place, recording that shift in the 300 log, but also then, in most cases, you'll do some retraining, coaching with the employee, perhaps refitting or changing the hearing protection devices that are being recommended to that employee. Again, all of these next steps are clearly outlined by OSHA or dictated by OSHA or MSHA or any of your regional hearing testing program requirements. So I'm not going to go too deep into those specifics, but just all that to say that there are clear guidelines for all of those processes. Okay, so that was a quick level set. We touched on what a hearing test is, baseline, and annual testing. I'm going to jump into the meat of it here with looking deeper at some of those topics I mentioned at the beginning. So first off, if I'm trying to tailor this content to meet both the needs of the in-house teams and service providers, so it feels like I'm jumping around a bit. I'm really trying to make sure that the content is relevant to both sides of the coin here. What we're looking at here is, as mentioned at the beginning, the costs associated with using a mobile unit to come onto a customer site to conduct hearing tests, and what some of the challenges associated with that type of program might be. For service providers, we're looking at the hard costs first. For service providers, just really basically, trucks are expensive. They're expensive to purchase, they're expensive to maintain. Just like any other vehicle, they have, they need fueling and insurance and maintenance, and all of those costs add up really quickly, over and above all of the, specialized equipment that they are configured with. Definitely not, I would say, the most cost-effective option for reaching smaller clients. So if you hit a certain size of customer, sure, you're gonna hit even at some point, and it will make sense. But for the smaller clients who may not have enough employees to justify a full or even half day of on-site testing, these mobile units may not be the best option. And then, of course, you have to consider, whether or not there's any employees that miss their scheduled appointments, and then what to do with those employees. If you're having to bring your truck back onto that customer site to do those retests, then you as a service provider are incurring those costs, and that's going to affect your bottom line. For in-house teams, unless you have hundreds of employees in your hearing conservation program, having a service provider come on site with their trucks might also be cost prohibitive. So because you're not only paying for their time on site, you may also have travel expenses, other data fees incurred, possibly audiological review or other services. Again, cost does become a factor for both, the in-house teams, but also service providers. I have inconvenient listed there. What I mean by that is a couple of things. Again, not to say that trucks don't have a place in certain types of hearing conservation programs, but I think there are some real challenges that they pose, certainly from a scheduling standpoint. So before I jump into that, actually, really basically, when we think about trucks, the first thing we need to think about is where do they actually situate themselves once they arrive on customer sites. So where do you park these trucks? I've worked with hundreds of clients now that have told me that it's a real challenge to find a location that's quiet enough to park the trucks where there isn't, a highway or a railroad or, maintenance vehicles driving around constantly making noise outside of the trucks. Yes, there are sound booths that assist with blocking out some of that ambient noise, but certainly, if you're parked on, the tarmac of an airport or, behind a manufacturing facility, there's going to be environmental noise that is just the reality of parking these trucks, on a customer site. The next thing I would say is scheduling. So scheduling is probably the biggest pain point that I can relay to you from speaking with hundreds of employers now. When we're thinking of using trucks for your hearing conservation program, typically what that means is, the employer will have the service provider come on site for a day or two, maybe even a week, depending on the size of the program. And then the employer is responsible for scheduling all of their employees in the most efficient way possible over that, 2 to 5 day period, which when you're thinking of plants that run on a 24-hour schedule, perhaps 7 days a week, multiple shifts throughout those days, scheduling can be a nightmare. So who's going to do that scheduling? I have one customer that I love to refer back to, but she told me that she was spending around 80 hours a year just scheduling hearing tests. So that's, 2 full weeks of her time spent simply booking hearing tests, and that was simply because they had 6 shifts over 3 and 5 different cycle operations. So scheduling is not something that it's certainly something that causes real pain, and I think that those resources, those hours that the hearing or the health and safety manager doing the scheduling certainly could be dedicated to more productive tasks. Lastly, scheduling is also something that can affect service providers. So depending on the size of your fleet, so if you only have 1 truck or maybe you have 5 trucks or 10 trucks, scheduling can also be difficult. So how do you, effectively allocate your resources among all of your clients to ensure you're being as efficient and cost-effective as possible? All of these challenges are, directly coming from feedback I've received from clients. Talking to me about some of the challenges that they've faced with programs that are, sort of handcuffed by the need or by the trucks themselves and the challenges that they pose. So if trucks aren't the answer, what is the answer? And we're here today to tell you that there is another way. Testing equipment or with systems, or what we try to share with our customers is that by using, cutting-edge technology, tablet-based testing equipment, cloud-based data management tools, let's bring occupational hearing conservation into the 21st century. Let's stop relying on the need to have these trucks and sound booths to conduct these tests that can easily be conducted in quiet environments inside within the customer environment, whether you're a service provider going on site or an in-house team managing your own program. There is definitely a better way that is not only less expensive, but more flexible in terms of scheduling, and certainly going to provide a much better experience for the employees, whether or not, needing to test within claustrophobic sound booths, in environments that perhaps aren't ideal, such as being parked outdoors next to environmental noise that could interfere with the tests. So I want to go a little bit deeper now in terms of looking at an alternative solution. Okay, Shoebox Audiometry really has three main components. So our solution, obviously you have the testing equipment. So our testing equipment is iPad-based. The Shoebox system comes complete with everything you're going to need to test. So we'll provide you with a kit that includes the iPad, the transducers, obviously an iPad stand, the cables, everything you need in one kit that's small, portable, lightweight. I think it weighs less than 4 pounds, if I'm correct in that. Really easy to, if you are a service provider, take on site and set up at your customer location. Or if you're an in-house team, really simple and easy to set up in a location that makes sense for your business, that is hopefully relatively close to where your employees are actively working, but also in an environment that's quiet enough to meet OSHA requirements for testing. We also include a data management system that allows you to do all kinds of automated shift reports, whether on an individual or group basis. It's a self-serve data management portal, which means you can do things like upload your historical results for baseline comparison, organize your data into groups. So if you wanted to use one system, for example, but share it between 3 or more or 2 or more sites, it's easy to do so. Keep your data nice and organized by department, site, location, whatever it may be. Likewise, if you're a service provider, very easy to use our system to service all of your customers and still keep your data organized by client for reporting purposes. And then lastly, in addition to the testing equipment and the data management tools, we, of course, are not just going to hand you these tools and expect you to know how to test with this technology and how to run your program in-house or run your program with Shoebox. You have a whole team of people that really are here to support you at every step of the way, whether you're a small independent service provider or you're a large employer with thousands of employees in your hearing conservation program. We have experience with the full range of customer sizes and customer use cases. So, both from just a simple program management standpoint in terms of how to manage your fleet of equipment, how to schedule your test cycles, all the way up to audiological review, program supervision from an audiological standpoint, sharing of best practices, training materials, from start to finish. Okay, so some of these points we've covered, but we're going to just do a bit of a deeper dive on some of them because I think they're worth repeating. Again, cost is always a factor when we're looking at programs managed by trucks. So eliminating the truck eliminates some of the hard costs that are going to make your program costly. So gas, insurance, maintenance costs, sure. Again, like I said, the truck is just like any vehicle. So you have all of those base costs in addition to maintaining the specialized equipment that they're equipped with. For in-house teams, obviously eliminating the service provider need will allow you to reduce some of your costs. But I think more than anything, what we're trying to stress here is that whether you're a service provider or an in-house program manager, there is a more cost-effective way to run your program that doesn't rely on these vehicles that are, quite frankly, outdated and adding unnecessary fees to your programs. The other thing I will say, and I've touched on this somewhat from a scheduling standpoint, but one of the I would say best practices that we share most often with our customers is trying to increase the efficiency of their programs. And again, this will apply to service providers and in-house teams alike. When we are limited by having, the truck with 4 booths, the cattle call of employees waiting in line outside the truck to get their tests done and all of that, trying to test everyone once per year and get everyone through the door in a very specific period of time, without fail, there's going to be, a lot of downtime, a lot of standing in line and waiting, and just really a drop in employee productivity during that time. It can be incredibly disruptive to your business operations if you're trying to test, let's say, 1,500 people over the course of a week or two. So what we try to encourage our customers to do is think of it differently. Think of moving away from this once per year testing cycle to a more rolling schedule. Because you could have this system in-house and set it up easily in different locations throughout your site, it just gives you more flexibility to test your people on a rolling schedule in a more efficient manner, which means less downtime for you, less disruption to your business operations, and less scheduling pressures on the employer or on the service provider, because you're not tied to a fixed test schedule. Continuing on that theme, I think one thing that is really important, so there's the continuous schedule note, but also retests are a big challenge when we're talking about programs run using trucks, because like I said, not always cost effective for the service provider to come on site if there's only 10 tests that need to be, or 10 people that need to be retested, either because a shift was detected or because they missed their appointment. So typically what we see is the employer will just send those employees out to be tested at a local clinic. That means additional costs incurred by the employer, and depending on how they do so or where they're located, those can actually be quite significant costs. It could also mean things like data gets lost and all kinds of other challenges. So one of the great things about using Shoebox is having the flexibility to, someone misses a test, no problem. You test them the next day, test them within, a week or two. You're not going to incur those same costs simply because they, weren't able to make their hearing test on the day they were scheduled to be there. For the service provider, and this is actually something that I've seen a few times now, and even for service providers, I will say that still have the traditional model of a mobile unit, Shoebox is a great solution for retesting, because let's say you go on site with your truck, this week, you have to do 10 retests for this customer, but really not cost effective for you to bring the whole mobile unit back on site next week to do those. What you could easily do is send someone, to parachute in with 1 or 2 or 3 Shoebox systems, get those tests done in a really nice and cost-effective way, still provide service to your customer. So whether you're that service provider or you're the in-house team here, I think the flexibility that Shoebox provides is a big bonus. Okay, and then here, this is really important. I'm going to spend some time on this because I think more and more we're seeing that this is really where, testing with Shoebox has really come to shine. So I've heard so many times that, I've got a new customer that's brought Shoebox in to their facilities, and they go, technology's great. Yeah, we're managing the program in-house. I like the control that gives me, but really what sold me on the system is the feedback I've received from my employees. Not having to sit in a sound booth, a cramped, tiny sound booth that's the size of, a fridge. Not having to have that pressure of reacting to a series of tones being presented, being able to control the test process themselves. Our systems in automated mode use a self-presenting test model. So just provides a much more enjoyable, comfortable experience for the employee. Their anxiety level goes down when they're not in the booth, and they're not feeling claustrophobic or hot. I would say gets or encourages buy-in from employees. So the more you can get employees to buy in to showing up on time to their hearing test every year, that's just going to help you from a compliance standpoint to make sure that they're, committed to the hearing conservation program in general. So I can't stress how important this is. And really, like I say, I've had customer after customer tell me that, the best thing about the system is providing a more enjoyable and positive experience for the employee themselves, and in an environment where their anxiety levels are down and they're feeling comfortable enough to complete the test. And hopefully that results in, more accurate results across the board as well. Data. So obviously with hearing conservation programs in general, data is always front of mind. So I mentioned one use case just a moment ago for retests. So as I said, so typically, let's say a traditional setup would be, in-house team hires service provider to conduct hearing tests at their location, but inevitably, let's say 10% of those appointments get missed or have to be retested for whatever reason. They will then refer those employees off-site to an audiologist for further review. Let's say a Concentra or some other clinic that's close by. So they do that. The employee is then given a hard copy record of that test result, or maybe you even have that result sent to you digitally if you have an agreement with those clinics already. And then that data typically needs to be added to some sort of EMR or locally stored system where you house all of your occupational health data. What happens if that step doesn't happen? The employee doesn't get you their results back, or the clinic doesn't send you that test result back. Lost data can be challenging for a number of reasons, mostly for compliance reasons. So if you can't prove that that test or retest was conducted, that's not a good thing for the employer. I would say that certainly if it's being given to the employee in a paper format, the chances of losing that data are higher. But all this to say, I think what we're hoping to do is eliminate that, lost data and ensure that all of your records are maintained, up to date, and in one place with, you will have the ability to control how they are organized and reported on and stored, and then fed into any other local EMR system as well. Our systems, of course, do integrate with all of the major EMR systems. So not to say that your data has to remain in the Shoebox web portal. Certainly integration is something that is done quite often with our systems. So again, just to stress that Shoebox, yes, we are an audiometer, absolutely, but certainly we are more than just that. Our tools are really designed to give you everything that you need, whether you are an in-house team or a service provider, to manage a hearing testing program effectively in a way that meets compliance standards, both from the actual testing process itself, but also, and perhaps more importantly, from a data management perspective as well. So a whole suite of automated reporting tools. Of course, we have, the in-app shift detection, so you'll know immediately in real time if any shifts in hearing are present with a particular employee, but also from a more high-level reporting standpoint, both individual and group-based analysis tools that are easy to use, intuitive, and of course, we'll train you on how to use them all as well. As far as managed services or program management, as we typically refer to it, this is going to be really dictated by you and your program requirements. So if you're just a small independent employer or a small independent service provider, we have very basic support packages that essentially we can get you up and running in very little time. We'll train you on how to use the equipment, but also the reporting tools, and provide access to technical and customer support teams to make sure that you're well supported. If you are, on the other hand, a much larger customer, so an enterprise-level customer with 100 sites across the U.S. and thousands of employees in your program, we also have a more robust enterprise customer support team that can do everything from designing pilot projects or proof of concept projects all the way through to deployment of 100 or more site deployment projects, and also from an audiological support standpoint as well. So really, the support and managed services offering will be dictated by the customer and designed around their unique requirements based on the size and configuration of their program. Okay, so let's speak a bit more about the different types of use cases in general. So again, regardless of whether you're in-house or a service provider, if you estimate that you're going to be testing, let's say, less than 500 people on an annual basis, I would say one of the benefits of our tools are really that you can be up and running in a matter of weeks. So typically, from the time an order is placed, it'll take a day or two to calibrate and ship. We would then schedule a one-on-one training session with you and your team. We like to schedule those as soon as possible after you receive your system. We'd let you choose the times that you want to do your training. It's all conducted virtually. And so really from start to finish, we could have you up and running testing in less than 2 weeks total. So for small companies or small service providers, nice, quick, easy solution to get up and running in a matter of days. For those larger programs, like I said, we build out custom programs. So we design a pilot program with you. We determine, what the success factors are going to be. We look at what you're currently doing, what that transition to an in-house project or a shoebox-led project or program would look like, and we work with you as consultants to make sure, because we realize that this is obviously going to be a departure from what you're currently using. Certainly the technology is quite different. If you are currently outsourcing the program and you're looking to bring it in-house, that will be different as well. Obviously, we have to think about transfer of historical records and things like that. So we have the expertise now, after working with hundreds of occupational health customers, to really be able to design programs based on your unique business operations, what your needs are, and we'll work with you to design what will be the most effective program. Okay, so just to recap here, again, I've said this already, but shoebox is different. It's obviously different, and how are we different? So to begin, obviously, we really work with our customers to create a more flexible testing program. Obviously, there are regulatory requirements involved that say, based on certain testing cycles, there are some rules we need to work within. But what I'm trying to get at here is, let's try and get away from this once per year testing model, the cattle call, and let's work towards a model that is less disruptive to your business, more in line with your business operations, and let's test employees in a more flexible way that they're going to enjoy and you're going to enjoy as the one overseeing the program. Also, which I haven't mentioned yet, but this is a good point, is not only for retesting, but also new employees. So one of the advantages of having a shoebox system, let's say in-house, is you're never going to be waiting to get that initial baseline audiogram. Having a shoebox system in-house is going to give you the ability to capture that baseline audiogram, at time of hire. It's also going to give you the ability to capture those retests without any added costs. So, if someone was sick that day or their child, was sick and had to be taken home, no problem. You just test them within a week or test them the next day even. So no added costs for retests or baseline captures. Obviously, the trucks and the costs associated with those we've already covered. In terms of the technology, obviously, as I've mentioned, shoebox audiometry is a new technology. We've been around for a handful of years now, but it is new and it will be different from what you're currently using. Like I said at the beginning, we're trying to bring hearing conservation into the 21st century here, not only with state-of-the-art technology for testing, but also in the way that we manage data and manage the program itself. And lastly, but certainly not least, is the employee experience. So we really believe that, the hearing test, the annual hearing test, does not have to be something that the employee dreads completing every year. Okay, this can be something that they actually enjoy doing, and I really would say that, this is not something to be underestimated, the impact of this, because like I say, this can really get buy-in from your employees to your hearing conservation program in general, which only increases your ability to meet compliance standards for testing programs. Okay, and before we get to the end here, I did want to just give you some sample of what the numbers would look like. So we've taken these numbers. These are real numbers from one of our customers. And I'm not going to go too deep into this specific example. This will be sent around following the presentation. What we wanted to show is just some of the potential cost savings, both hard costs and soft costs, that can be, that you can achieve with shoebox, because they are significant. What I'll also say is that for anyone who is listening and that would like a customized ROI analysis like the one that you see on the screen, we're more than happy to provide these. We have a really basic calculator that helps you walk through these costs. We can even send you the calculator if you want to input your own costs and play around with numbers, using that template. So either way, please let me know after the call if you would like to see one of these with your own numbers and costs input. But as you can see there, just using one very simple example and a couple of really basic costs that typically are part of a hearing conservation program, again, both hard costs and soft costs, you can see that you stand to save quite significantly by switching over to a shoebox-based program. Okay, and lastly, what we have here is, we're proud of our customers. We're proud of the organizations that we work with. We've had amazing customer partners that have, that we've learned so much from, and that really have had a huge impact on the product, the services that we offer, how we support our customers. And so this is just a very small sample of some of the types of organizations that we currently work with in an occupational, with our occupational program. But certainly this is a very small sample of the hundreds that we do work with in the U.S. and Canada, and I now believe it's 54 countries throughout the world. So I'm going to end the presentation there. I welcome all of your questions and appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Alexa. So we do have a couple questions that have already come in. So the first question to kick it off with will be, how do you determine where a quiet location is? How quiet does it need to be?
Yep, wonderful question. So I'm going to answer this in a couple of different ways. So first, to give you an example of the types of rooms that are being used, I would say typically what I see, regardless of what industry we're talking about here, whether it's aviation, manufacturing, food processing, typically what I see is there's an office space. A smaller room is better. Smaller is better because it has less echoes and less ability for sound in the space. It's going to be a small office or small meeting room that is just either designated for that day or a few hours to be the testing room, or it's chosen because it's relatively close to the workstations but also quiet enough because it's on, let's say, the second floor of the plant. In terms of what dictates or what qualifies as a quiet room, well, that's really easy because OSHA tells us. So OSHA has a table that dictates what is called the M-panel values. So M-panel simply means maximum permissible ambient noise level. And so for the frequencies that are tested as part of an OSHA mandated test, we know exactly what the ambient noise level is allowed to be for each frequency. So what I would say, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. If you do have a sound level meter on site that you can go and take noise measurements of the room you plan to use, certainly that would be the easiest way to do that. Otherwise, there's actually a few really good apps that you can download on either an iPad or iPhone or some other mobile device and just take a sample of a few different spaces. In general, what I would say, it's hard to give you a specific decibel level because, again, the M-panel values are frequency specific. But if I were to give you an average, I would say shoot for around 40 dB in a space, any given space. The other thing I will say, because I think it is of value, I've had a few customers that at first did have a challenge finding a room that was quiet enough. There's some really cost-effective solutions to get around that. One that I've seen most commonly is they'll buy some soundproofing foam. It costs pennies, really. It costs nothing to source, and they'll just put it up on the walls in a particular room that has been designated for hearing testing. Not that it has to be used for only hearing testing, but it's been designated as the hearing testing room in their facility, so they'll do that. There's also really cost-effective ways. One of the most common sources of ambient noise that I've seen is fans in a room, so ceiling, not ceiling fans that are rotating, but the actual fans or ducts in the room. Really easy ways to mitigate that noise. I know we use a few in-house in our calibration labs, for example. So there's really easy ways if you do struggle to find a room, although I will say that the vast majority of my customers have been able to find a room that was quiet enough within their facilities. But worst case scenario, there are a few different ways that you can quite easily and cost effectively find ways to dampen ambient noise using, like I say, for example, soundproof foam.
Awesome. Thank you so much. The next question I have for you is, how do you schedule?
Great question. So there's a couple of different ways. So I mentioned throughout the presentation that we really do try to encourage our customers, depending on their size. If it's a small operation, the once per year might not be a huge burden. But if you do get up to a certain size of program, let's say a few hundred people, we really try to get our customers to move away from that once per year model and onto a rolling schedule based usually on hire date. Now, in the first year, if you are transitioning from a once per year model to a rolling schedule, we have a way to transition. It usually requires that some employees get more than one test in that first year, but once you've reset their test cycles, it's pretty easy to maintain. So that's the first piece, is getting away from the once per year testing schedule in general, which alleviates the pressure to do all of the scheduling for everyone over the course of a few days each year. And then the second thing I will say is that our technology, our tools actually provide several ways to assist, or they assist you in your scheduling tasks. So, for example, once an employee is set up in Shoebox Audiometry, we have a way to set certain cycles. So if you want to say that once, you'll set that employee up as a new hire, let's say, they need to have their baseline test conducted within, let's say, 7 days. So, and then they want their annual test every year on the same day as that. So we have a way in our system to flag employees with certain anniversary dates, let's call them, so that depending on the day or the month that we're in, the administrator or the health and safety manager or the person overseeing the program can simply pull a report that says, okay, who's due for testing today or this week or this month, or who is out of compliance today, as of today, or who needs to be tested next week or next month. So we have some really nice, really easy to use scheduling tools built into the actual product that we show our customers, that we train our customers on, so that they can use those really simple tools to more effectively schedule their testing cycles.
Thank you. The next question I have for you is, can a person who is not a medical professional be trained to use the equipment and administer the test?
Yeah, great question. Absolutely. So Shoebox Audiometry has, I would say, 3 main test modes. We have a fully automated test. We have a semi-automated test wherein the tones are pre-selected by the software's algorithm. However, the pace of the test is dictated by an administrator. And then we have a fully manual mode test. So the first 2 types, the automated and semi-automated tests, yes, you can administer those tests without being certainly without being a medical professional, but also without requiring any specialized certification. That being said, we do provide one-on-one training to all of our customers. So it's not as though we expect you to know how to use the system and how to test with it. No, we will train you, of course. But in terms of certification, no special certification is required. The automated and semi-automated tests will fall under the microprocessor category when we're talking about classifications of audiometers. So all of the, shift calculations, AHL calculations, all of that is being done automatically by the software itself. So it's fairly hands-off for the administrator. The third type of testing, which is fully manual, yes, absolutely. At minimum, the administrator would need to be KEOC certified, but really it's usually audiologists, ENTs, medical professionals that would use the manual mode. Some of my customers use the manual mode, but in most cases in occupational health, I see the automated and semi-automated modes being used, and for those particular test types, no specialized certifications are required to administer tests.
Thank you. The next question I have for you is, are all of the audiograms sent directly to an audiologist for review, or are they just sent if a shift is noted?
Good question. That's really going to depend on the customer. So we do provide audiological review services, but it's not required. So many of my customers prefer to use, let's say, a local audiologist to do their review. Perhaps that audiologist is also their program supervisor. That's absolutely fine. The customer does not need to take advantage of our audiological review services. It's really, up to the customer to decide how much or how little of our services they'd like to use. And like I say, many have an existing relationship with another audiologist, whether it's in-house or they have someone locally that they refer out to. If the question, though, is about whether or not every single audiogram needs to be reviewed versus only those with a shift, that's a different question. So I would say typically what I see is that for any audiogram that we would consider a problem audiogram, certainly for any audiogram that has a shift detected, yes, you'll want to have an audiologist review those results, absolutely. Whether or not you use us for that, that's up to the customer. It's up to you. You do not need to use our team of audiologists, but that is something that we can provide if you don't already have a pre-existing relationship with an audiologist who provides that service for you.
Thank you. The next question I have is, do you offer a way for employees to view their training at the same time of the hearing test?
That will depend on what format the training is in. I'm thinking of some examples of my customers. So one of the things I love about Shoebox is that because it's iPad-based, the iPad is not a dedicated device. It can absolutely be used for other testing applications, other training applications. I have one customer that I'm working with right now that has quite a robust internal training program for occupational hearing conservation with all kinds of coursework and video content. And what we were able to do is actually upload that content onto the iPad itself so that their employees, what they'll do usually is they'll use the iPad to first complete their, their questionnaire or survey. They'll complete their hearing test, and then they'll also complete directly on the iPad their annual refresher training right on the iPad as well. And then all of that data, all of the results from the hearing tests, but also their training program gets fed into a local system, an internal system that logs all of those for compliance purposes. So can we create solutions like that? Absolutely. You can use the iPad for showing video, showing content to be read, to sign off on training records. Absolutely. I would say it's something that we encourage is our customers to make use of the technology, beyond just providing a hearing test.
Thank you. The next question I have is, how often do you need to calibrate the machine, and how do you manage it?
Yeah, great question. So a full acoustic calibration needs to be completed on an annual basis for any audiometer. We are no different. We are different in how we complete our calibration process. So one of the challenges we found with traditional audiometric equipment is that you were having to send out the equipment for calibration, and then you'd have downtime where you weren't able to test because your equipment was being serviced. So we thought that was not very smart. So what we do instead is we proactively monitor calibration dates. Typically about 1 month prior to your calibration anniversary, someone from our customer care team contacts you, notifies you of your upcoming calibration anniversary. We'll confirm things with you such as, do you want to continue using our service? And if so, wonderful. What we do is instead of having you send us your equipment, we actually just proactively send you new transducers that are calibrated to your system. You send us back the old ones in the same box that we send to you. And as soon as you receive your new equipment, you just plug and play. It's ready to go as soon as you open the box. So there's never any downtime. There's never any worrying about missing your calibration date because all of that is taken care of by our teams. And so it's really a hands-off. It's one less headache for you. We manage that entire process for the customer.
Thank you. The next question I have for you is, how do you provide the results to the employee?
Sure. So, I mean, there's a couple of different ways. The results will display on the iPad immediately following a test. So once the test is complete, the clinically valid audiogram will appear on screen. The administrator can then review the results with the employee, using the iPad. We also have the ability to have the employee and the administrator sign off on the results directly on the iPad. So to say, John Smith completed this test at this time. I confirm these results are, true and valid. So that can be done in real time in the field using the iPad. Of course, there is also the ability you can actually email or print the audiogram directly from the iPad. In most cases, though, and I should say more than just the audiogram, you can email or print the full summary report for the employee as well from the iPad. Most of my customers prefer to eliminate the paper records, so they're going to email that record directly from the iPad to the employee. If you prefer to have a hard copy, you have two options. You can print that record directly from the iPad, or you can log into your web portal and generate a report on any computer. So any computer, does not have to be an Apple product. You can download a summary report or audiogram for any employee and then provide that record to them in hard copy as well. But it's really up to how the customer manages their program.
Awesome, thank you. The next question I have is, what other services do you offer to help manage this program?
Sure. So, I mean, as I mentioned, we have a whole range of audiological services that we offer, from review to program supervision. I would say customized training is one of those services I see quite frequently being requested. So we can provide customized training materials. We can do on-site training, over and above the virtual training. We can do fleet management, so using a mobile device management solution, we can tell you about the health of your program. So let's say you have 50 sites spread out throughout the country. We can monitor those sites for you to say, no testing has been done in site, B in the last month, what's going on there, that kind of thing. We can certainly provide best practices in terms of your testing program in general. We can assist in custom integration. So if you have, let's say, an EMR system and an LMS system that you need your data to be fed through, we can design custom integration and workflows for your program. I would say really the possibilities are limitless based on the customer's requirements. Typically, we don't pre-design our packages. It's really the customer comes to us, presents us with a challenge and says, I need your help with this challenge. And then we go back to the drawing board, design a solution, present it to the customer, and come together to create a solution as partners. So it's because it's a software-based solution, it's incredibly flexible and easy to mold to the customer's requirements.
Thank you. The next question I have for you is, what does the equipment look like?
Sure. So the testing equipment is comprised of an iPad. It's a regular iPad. It's not a special iPad. Like I said, it doesn't have to be a dedicated device. It comes preloaded with our proprietary software. The transducers, you do have an option. We have several options for transducers. That being said, the most commonly employed transducer is one produced by Radio Ear, which is the DD450. And the transducers plug directly into the iPad. So in addition to the iPad, you have the transducers, you have an iPad stand. So we recommend that the iPad is placed in the stand during testing, so we'll provide you with that. Of course, all of your cables and accessories, calibration certificates, things like that. All of the equipment fits into one kit that is the size of a shoebox, hence the name. And like I said, it weighs less than 4 pounds, so really lightweight. Each system is incredibly portable, lightweight, and easy to set up, wherever it needs to be set up.
Thank you. The next question I have is, you mentioned in the initial survey the hearing test and the annual training. How much time does it take to complete everything from start to finish?
Okay, so I'll try to answer this question, but this is not really one that I can answer, in a global statement. What I can tell you is that when I'm working with my customers, I typically tell them to book employees in 15-minute windows. So, allow a couple of minutes to provide instructions on how the test works. No more than 10 minutes for the test itself. I typically find that the test takes 6 to 8 minutes when we're testing 7 frequencies. That gives you about 30 seconds per frequency per ear. And then I like to leave around 5 minutes at the end, or more if you like, to go over the results of the test and do some coaching with the employee. Now, if you're adding in other factors to that process, such as if you were adding in, say, a survey or questionnaire, you need to give the employee a few minutes to complete that. We have one standard questionnaire built into our tool that takes approximately 5 minutes to complete or less, depending on the individual. But if you were adding in that questionnaire time, then, add that to the total. And then, in terms of adding in training, that's really up to your program and what you've designed. What I see most frequently is that, at time of hire, the employees will all receive quite a thorough, hearing conservation training program. And then on an annual basis, it's usually what I consider a refresh training. One customer that I mentioned earlier that was using the iPad to show video content, they have what they call a 5-minute refresh video. So it's a 5-minute, really quick refresher on things like how to properly insert your hearing protection devices and things like that, how to protect your hearing when you're working in noisy environments. So that's a 5-minute refresh, so then that would add that time on to the total appointment time. But that will really depend on whether your training materials require more time to cover or less, or if you want to include that training time in your annual hearing test appointment. It's really up to, again, how that program is being run.
Thank you. The next question I have for you is, can you use previous audiograms gathered with other devices to do a baseline analysis with Shoebox?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The system really depends on that, actually. Certainly you can gather baselines with Shoebox, but, the vast majority of my customers will, will have data gathered with other systems. So they'll need to upload or need to have those baselines and historical results used for any baseline comparison once they switch to Shoebox. So there's 2 ways that you can, well, there's 3 ways that you can add baselines or historical results to Shoebox. The simplest way would be through a file import, so CSV file import. You can also add values manually if you really wanted to using our web-based portal. That obviously would be more time intensive. So most of my customers simply upload a CSV file from, gathered from any other system. It doesn't matter if the results were gathered with, a service provider or another traditional audiometric system. It doesn't matter. We all speak the same language. We all use conventional file formats, which means it's really easy for you to upload historical results into Shoebox and then have those as your baseline comparisons. For our enterprise customers, because we're typically dealing with large volumes of data, typically the file import is not the option they go with. It's usually a direct integration with either an SAP or a Cordy or OHM or some other local system that controls all of their employee files. And there's usually, a nightly feed of data being pushed over so that all of your employee files are updated on a regular basis and then used, not only your employee lists, but also your audiometric data is being updated regularly and then compared against new results that are gathered using Shoebox. So depending on the complexity and the size of the program, there's a few different ways that we can get historical records in, but really even if you're a small program or a small independent service provider, really easy to get existing records into Shoebox for comparison with new results. And I will say as well too, it's equally as easy to export or pull data out. So the data does not need to reside in Shoebox. Very easy to pull data out, export for storage or further analysis in other systems as well.
Thank you, Alexa. And I have one more question before we wrap it up for the day. Do you rent the device and keep it at the workplace year-round?
Yeah, great question. So typically our systems would be leased on an annual basis. So it's an all-in-one fee. So again, depending on if you're a small independent or company or whether you're a large company, we would include everything in one price. So it would be the price of the testing equipment, the data management reporting tools, the services. We would package that up nicely for you and give you a one price. So you're paying one fee per year, no additional fees throughout the year, no calibration costs, no maintenance costs, no service costs or anything. It's just a one fee per year, renewed on an annual basis. But like I said, you're not tied to long-term contracts or anything. You always have the option to exit the contract, at each year, which is why we verify, whether or not you're going to continue with us before we calibrate, for example. So no long-term commitments, one-year terms, annually recurring, and it's an all-in-one fee.
Thank you so much, Alexa. Did you have any closing comments you would like to add before I wrap it up?
No, I mean, the only thing I'll say is that, like I mentioned at the end of the presentation, if anyone on the call is interested in that customized ROI calculations, it's a nice, easy way for you to assess the potential value of Shoebox or the potential for switching to a Shoebox-based program. So please contact me. I'm happy to provide a customized version of that with your own data, or simply provide you with the calculator so you can play around with the numbers yourself. And certainly if anyone else has any other questions that they need answered, feel free to send them my way, and we'll do our best to get back to them quickly.
Thank you so much, Alexa, and I would especially like to thank today's webinar sponsor, Shoebox Audiometry, for making today's event possible. A few final notes before we wrap it up for the day. You will receive an email from the EHS Daily Advisor within the next 24 hours that will contain a link to today's recording should you like to view it again or pass it over to a friend. Lastly, at the close of this, and once again, the EHS Daily Advisor and Shoebox would like to thank you again for joining us today. This concludes our program.